Hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well today. I hope you're doing well.
Good day so far.
You know, it has been a good day so far for a lot of us. However, for other folks, gee whiz, it seems as though there's been a recent spike in COVID-19 cases, particularly of what they're calling the Delta variant, Sam, and not the American or the United or the Southwest, but the Delta variant. And, it seems as though those folks that are being admitted to hospitals with the Delta variant overwhelmingly are people that have not been vaccinated yet. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're starting to see certain states and cities, re-up their mask mandates, and everyone's starting to freak out again, and kind of understandably so. People who are, I don't know, business owners or even just employees that are kind of on the line of, are they going to keep their job or not? And another shutdown is something that rightfully so horrifies a lot of people.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And particularly last year, when you take a look at some of the economic sectors which were hit the hardest, we're looking at educational services, we're looking at leisure and hospitality, looking at just other services in general, and just really anything that there is a intimate sort of face-to-face sort of like meeting with people. Those jobs got hurt inordinately, far more so than, say, office jobs at the bank or whatnot. Those jobs were barely touched. So when we're looking at an increase in the potential for more economic shutdowns, intuitively, it'd be those same sectors which got hit the hardest last year would get the whammy again this year.
Right, and it caused widespread economic damage. It wasn't just siloed to the people who were really hurt the most and the people who were losing the jobs. I mean, we saw the financial markets, S&P lose over 30%, I think it was at one point. It hurt essentially everybody in one way or another.
So if this spike in Delta variant cases does end up causing some of the more, shall we say, reactionary or more aggressive local and state politicians to shut down their economies again. And for whatever reason, obviously Cuomo comes to mind, Newsom comes to mind, Whitmer comes to mind, sort of the cast of characters last year that were more draconian than other states. It would seem as though those state economies, those local economies would also be hit very hard, much more so than those in other states where the lockdowns weren't quite as great. What is interesting, though, Sam, is those states which were the hardest hit last year also are the ones which had the highest vaccination rates, meaning that perhaps the overall spike in Delta variant cases in those states might not be as great as they would be on a relative basis, say, in Arkansas or Alabama. However, wouldn't it be kind of strange or maybe even ironic if all of a sudden Newsom or Cuomo shuts down the state economies again, even though higher percentages in those states have been vaccinated?
Yeah, and that the flip side of that coin is what gives me a little comfort in some states is a lot of the states that were hesitant towards a lockdown still initiated some form of slowing their economy down and shutting businesses down the first time, because really no one knew what to do with this. No one knew how to handle this, or no one knew if it was airborne or what have you. No one knew. And now the second time around, we're seeing some states adamantly say, we are not doing this again. We're not going through a lockdown again. We know how to mitigate this as best as we can, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to do our best to mitigate it. We're going to keep businesses open, and we're going to flourish as an economy compared to some of these other states. And that's what gives me comfort in this. And even some of the more draconian lockdowns, right now you're seeing mask mandates reinitiated, I think in LA and some other cities and states. And that's one thing, to fully shut down businesses, to put caps on the people who can enter businesses. It hasn't seemed to have gotten that far yet with the Delta variant, where we're starting to essentially ruin businesses again. So that's the flip side of that coin that gives me a little comfort.
Well, that does give me a little bit of comfort, and also gives me a little bit of comfort that perhaps maybe the headlines aren't quite, perhaps the headlines are perhaps a little bit more scary than the reality of the situation is. I've gone to the CDC website, taken a look at new COVID cases, even in states like Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, some other states which have low overall vaccination rates compared to the nation as a whole. We are still at a fraction of the COVID-19 cases in this state there we were in the middle of last year. It's not even close.
Right, and then you look at even more so than cases, severe illnesses and deaths, and those really haven't had any trend up. And you even take the UK, which has kind of been what everyone's focused on for the Delta variant, as that's where it's been most rampant. Yeah, cases have shot back up, but a lot of those cases are asymptomatic cases, and the total deaths in the UK really haven't really ticked back up anywhere near what they did the first time around when cases were going up. The first time, late last year when we saw the second spike in cases, we saw almost a 1-for-1 correlation with deaths, or not a 1-for-1, but the two lines were pretty similar. And this time you're seeing cases spike back up and you're seeing deaths essentially staying low where they were before the spike up in cases.
Well, and Sam, I think it's important to note that we're not trying to be cavalier about the seriousness of COVID-19. It is a thing. A lot of people that we know have caught it. I've lost a couple of people that I knew due to it. They were older in age, but regardless, I mean, it is a real thing. However, I guess the question is the potential for another round like we had 2020 worth, for all intents and purposes, wrecking the U.S. economy, wrecking the global economy? Because Sam, I'm not 100% certain that even if the government were to throw money out of helicopters, small business owners would be able to take another year like last year. I mean, those that survived did so by the skin of their teeth. Business conditions are looking much better now. You put another double whammy on that, and that small business owner, that restaurant owner, that person that runs a small daycare, I don't know how they're coming back out of that.
I mean, we saw lots and lots of businesses still shut down with the amount of PPP and individual stimulus that we were handing out last year, and we still saw thousands and thousands of U.S. businesses close. And I know anecdotally, people around here that's saying, okay, we got through it. We're finally starting to pick back up again. Now we're struggling to find enough employees, but they're getting back up on their feet again. And it just seems like would be such an awful time to go back and, kneecap them again and really just hurt these businesses right when they're starting to get back up on their feet.
Well, I've done a little traveling around the Southeast recently, and obviously it's difficult to not let anecdotal evidence, what your eyeballs see, it's difficult to not let that kind of impact your overall thesis or your forecast of what lies ahead. And Sam, I would tell you right now, at least to the local economy, what I saw driving through Georgia last week and what I saw over in South Carolina, it appears as though America is ready to get back to work. America is ready to travel. America is ready to spend money. America is ready to eat out at restaurants. America is just ready to get back to some sense of normalcy. And at least where I have been, the people that I've spoken to, they would be very disappointed with any attempt by politicians or mandarins of any sort to disrupt their economic livelihood at this juncture.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've flown several times already this year, and every time I've flown, I've almost thought it's maybe the most crowded that I've ever seen it. We've talked about, and everyone's used the term roaring 20s for what this looks like, coming out of a pandemic, and people have excess capital to spend and the trips they didn't take last year. And really, I mean, it seems to be that people are a lot more hard-headed about going out and spending their money and doing things with it, because for all intents and purposes, people lost 18 months of their lives in a lot of situations. I mean, people didn't travel for a year and a half. That's a big part of both business and leisure, is flying, traveling, going places. And it seems like it'd be a lot harder this time to get people to, agree to just shut down again.
One would imagine, but we happen to live in a state where people really distrust government a lot more than perhaps in some other states. And I think certainly our Governor Kay Ivey would have a difficult time shutting us down again without a riot happening or a significant protest. I don't know how some other sections of the country are, which are perhaps a little bit more pro-government or more government friendly, how they would respond. But I would caution whoever is in favor of this to take a look at the local restaurants. Take a look at your local places of worship. Can they take another 12 months of lockdown, another 6 months of lockdown, not being able to worship in person, not being able to go grab a bite in person, not be able to grab a beer or a drink or what have you? Are these businesses, are these places really financially sound enough where they can do that?
Yeah.
And I would caution, or I would suggest, no, they aren't.
What would you say if we do start to shut down again? Do you think politicians would be as happy to print more checks for people and throw more stimulus at this.
I would say they would really have no other alternative. If I'm going to lose my job, my livelihood due to a government mandate that I can't operate my business, and if they don't give me some sort of compensation or remuneration or some sort of salve, you can imagine small business owners across the country would absolutely be trying to settle this in the court systems, and I think that would be fair. I mean, if the government is going to prohibit me from earning my livelihood, well, come on, that's fine. But you better give me some money.
And that's kind of my fear is this friction we're starting to see with spending money at the federal level. We're finally starting to see a little bit of pushback against some of the reckless spending that we've done for years. Even before COVID, we had this trend of spending money when we didn't need to. And, now that we have essentially a blue wave last year, Republicans start to get a little more conservative with spending money when they're not in the presidential seat. And that's what we've seen every time there's a Democratic president. And that fear that some of these people are saying now, okay, maybe we don't need to spend the same amount of money that we were. And you're still starting to see some lockdowns, maybe on a smaller level, where you're going to see some businesses be severely impacted and not have the same sort of financial aid that they were having the first time around.
Yeah, and so it's real question marks out there with the Delta variant, but then also some real concerns about what happens if we shut things down again. But now maybe shifting gears just a little bit. Sam, I'm doing some research for this week's podcast. I went and took a look at just vaccination rates just in general. And as you know, the southern states in general, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas in particular, have very low levels of overall vaccination rates, right?
Yep.
And going through it, I saw that Montgomery actually puts out some stats that shows who's getting vaccinated and who's not. And I was surprised to see that really our older population in this state, 65 plus, and I apologize if that offends anyone, but it's just demographic ages that they broke things down. And those groups are running around 75%. Yep. President Biden said trying to get 70% by July 4th. And so our older population in this state, Mississippi and Arkansas, those seem to be listening to the message and getting vaccinated. It's our younger populations that aren't listening or not getting it done at all. And interestingly, in Alabama, from 0 to 17, only 5% of that age demographic has gotten a vaccination. And in your demographic, 18 to 29, that number is like in between 20 and 25%, suggesting that our low overall levels of vaccination in our state, which bring us way down in the national polls, really have to do with our youngest and arguably most healthy age demographics. Comparatively speaking, some of the higher vaccinated states like a Washington or whatnot, people your age and younger, those are hovering around 55%. Whereas if you add up those two youngest age groups, we're trending at about 12%. So, is it safe to say that Alabama's low vaccination rate, while we have seen an increase in Delta variant cases, just about everyone has, but our low vaccination rates are really on the younger and healthier segments of our society? As such, should that stem any sort of negative economic decline from the Delta variant?
Well, it should, and that's what we were kind of talking about earlier, with cases going up and severe illnesses and deaths going down or still trending downwards is what you were saying. And I think that's something we were both kind of banging our fists on the table for as soon as vaccinations were coming out, were get the sick, get the high risk people vaccinated and open things back up. I mean, I'm a big proponent for opening schools back up completely. I think the damage there, and I think you're in agreement, the damage to having virtual school for especially elementary, middle school, and even younger kids is severely detrimental. And I think it'll take years to kind of unwind that impact. However, those are the people that typically in the data shows that this disease doesn't really impact them. I get there's cases of it, and sometimes bad things happen with people that age, but it's typically not that impactful on the youth. And so, obviously a higher vaccination rate would be great, but the fact that we have most of or a majority of the high risk people vaccinated in this state, I think is something that lends itself to not shutting back down again.
And I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And I think that's what the politicians really need to take a look at. And their various health departments can break down the data pretty well. Who's not vaccinated in your state? Is your at-risk population vaccinated? And those people that have not been vaccinated, if you can track it in any way, shape, or form, let's find out why they're not. I've got no problem with the government asking why. I don't really love the idea of the government mandating vaccinations, but it could be just like, I'm too lazy. I mean, sometimes people are just, that might sounds crazy. Some people are like, I just,
apathy is a big part of it.
It's just inertia. I don't like to get shots. I'm scared of the pain, all that type of stuff. We can talk people off the ledge with that, and that could probably increase that somewhat. But you bring up a very good point about schools. And Sam, I have from the get-go, really from out of the gate, stressed and said to whoever would want to listen that we're hurting the least among us far more than any other group by shutting down the schools, because people in lower income demographics, single family households, by and large, this is what the data says, have less access to technology than people who are wealthy. So you're having elementary school age children. Some of them don't even have access to the internet. But if they do, it's not going to be high speed, and oftentimes it's only a phone or maybe a tablet that they have at their house. Certainly not a computer or something with any sort of significant computing power, let alone a printer or something like that. So when we shut down schools for in-person learning, what we're really doing is we're really hurting the bottom 25% more so than anyone else.
Absolutely. And I mean, anecdotally, I think everyone knows teachers who have said, I know some that have said, there's issues getting their homework in, doing it all over Zoom. They don't have internet. We just pass them and they go on to the next grade. And this is something, not just that specifically, but this whole subject is something that I think is hard to quantify in a very short-term thing, to look back and say this past year has been detrimental. I think most people agree that it has, but I think the effects of it are going to be shown 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line. And at that point, it's kind of hard to make up the damage done. Whether it's something like cigarettes, we've had all these things in the past where the damage done isn't kind of figured out until it's already done and you can't really go back and do anything about it. It scares me. I really think there's going to be long-term consequences to kind of, I don't want to say a lost generation, but kind of a lost year of education, especially in the age where kids need it the most. It's kind of hard to come back from.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And you're making a very strong case why we don't need to shut down economies and school systems again, because we might not ever come back out of it this next go around. And even if businesses can, or school districts can, the children and the hourly workers that will be losing the experience, that will be losing the education, they're going to fall further behind. And those are the people that can afford it the least.
Absolutely.
And I think we're in agreement on that. One last thing before we go here today, it says going back and take a little look about vaccinations. And the data suggests that vaccinations are slowing across the country. A lot of people have a lot of reasons why they don't want to get vaccinated. However, I do think the government could do a better job in just trying to determine exactly where the gaps are in their state and trying to plug those gaps as much as possible. And if it's in, say, in Alabama, where 75% of the age those 65 plus have been vaccinated, maybe they should look at those people between the ages of 50 and 64, which is down about 50%, huge drop down right there, and spend most of the majority of their time focusing on that group, which is a higher risk factor than focusing on teenagers and preteens that probably won't be as detrimentally impacted. So we've got the data out there. We just need to be smart about how we use it.
I think that's a trend for everything in this country, is looking at the data more.
Fair enough. Well, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always have fun, and we always love to hear from you all. So by all means, drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you want to hear more, read more, or listen more to what we have to say or how we think, by all means, please go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of good information. Sam, I'm going to give you a last chance to add something super, super awesome here today.
Guess I'm going to disappoint because that's all I got.
Yeah, that's all I've got today too. Y'all take care.